Imagine growing up hearing one story your entire life, repeating it at school, seeing it in movies, watching it echoed on TV, until it starts to feel like an unshakable truth. Now imagine stepping off a plane in another country and realizing that story might not be the full picture. Today we're talking about the moments when Americans travel, live abroad, or scroll a little too far on social media and suddenly discover something genuinely shocking to them. Other countries also have freedom, not just a little bit of it. Real freedom, and sometimes in ways they never expected. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. For many Americans, freedom is treated almost like a national brand. It's woven into the language, the politics, the history lessons, and even casual conversations. From a young age, the message is clear. Freedom is the defining feature of American identity. So when someone grows up surrounded by that idea, it's not surprising that the rest of the world can feel like a giant question mark. If America is the land of the free, then what exactly is everyone else doing? That question starts to unravel the moment an American actually experiences life outside the United States. Not through headlines or stereotypes, but through everyday reality. It often begins with something small, a casual conversation with a local, a rule that turns out to be more flexible than expected, or a moment where they realize they feel safer, calmer, or more at ease than they ever did back home. Take the classic travel scenario. An American lands in a European city, maybe for vacation or study abroad. They expect beauty, history, good food, sure, but freedom? That's not what they're mentally prepared for. Then they notice people sitting in parks late at night without worry. They see teenagers taking public transportation alone. They hear people openly criticize their government in cafes without lowering their voices. And that's when the confusion starts to creep in. Wait, I thought this place was supposed to be restrictive. Social media is full of these moments. Videos where Americans say things like, "I didn't realize people here can just walk everywhere," or "I didn't know healthcare could be this accessible," or even, "Why does it feel like people here have more time to live?" These aren't political statements most of the time. They're genuine moments of surprise. Moments where the definition of freedom quietly shifts. Because freedom isn't just about flags or slogans. It's about how life actually feels day to day. Can you afford to get sick without fear? Can you take time off without risking your job? Can you move around your city easily? Can you live without constant anxiety? In many countries, these questions don't feel radical. They're just part of the social structure. One of the biggest shocks comes from work-life balance. Americans are often taught that long hours equal success, and freedom means the ability to hustle as hard as you want. Then they move to places where people legally cannot be overworked, where vacation time is guaranteed, where leaving work on time isn't seen as laziness, but normal. And suddenly the question becomes uncomfortable. If I'm free, why do I feel more trapped by my job than people who live elsewhere? Another moment that hits hard is healthcare. Many Americans are stunned when they realize that in other countries, going to the doctor doesn't involve negotiating bills, arguing with insurance companies, or fearing financial ruin. They see people seeking medical care early instead of waiting until things become emergencies. That kind of security creates a quiet freedom most Americans were never told to look for. Then there's freedom of movement. Americans are often shocked to discover how easy it is to live without a car in many parts of the world. Cities built for walking, biking, and public transport feel liberating in a way that's hard to explain until you experience it. Suddenly, independence doesn't mean owning a vehicle and paying endless costs. It means being able to go anywhere without stress. Speech is another area where assumptions get flipped. Many Americans believe freedom of speech exists only in the US, but then they witness open protests abroad, fierce debates on television, and public criticism of leaders without fear. In some cases, they realize conversations feel less polarized, less hostile, and less performative. That doesn't mean every country has perfect speech laws, but it does challenge the idea that honest expression is uniquely American. Of course, this realization doesn't always come easily. Some Americans react defensively at first. They feel like acknowledging freedom elsewhere somehow diminishes their own country. But for many, the opposite happens. They begin to see freedom as something bigger than borders, something that takes different shapes depending on culture, history, and values. There's also a generational shift happening. Younger Americans traveling, studying abroad, or living as digital nomads are sharing their experiences openly online. They're saying things like, "I feel safer here," or "I feel less stressed," or "I finally understand what people mean when they talk about quality of life." These aren't attacks, they're reflections, and they're going viral because they resonate. The most interesting part is that many Americans don't lose pride in their country through these experiences. They gain perspective. They start asking better questions. Why does freedom have to look only one way? Why can't multiple systems offer different kinds of liberty? Why weren't we taught that freedom can exist without constant pressure, fear, or exhaustion? Some even return home with a new appreciation, not just criticism. They see what works elsewhere and wonder how it could inspire improvement. That's not disloyalty, that's growth. What really shocks Americans isn't that other countries have freedom. It's that no one ever told them to look for it. The narrative was so loud, so confident, that curiosity never had room to breathe. And once curiosity finally shows up, it changes everything. So the next time you see a video of an American saying, "I didn't know it was like this," remember that you're watching a worldview expand in real time. You're seeing someone realize that freedom isn't owned, exported, or trademarked. It's lived differently everywhere. And maybe the most freeing idea of all is this: discovering freedom elsewhere doesn't take anything away from anyone. It simply reminds us that the world is bigger, more complex, and more interesting than the stories we're told growing up. By the time many Americans fully process that other countries also have freedom, a second realization usually hits even harder. Freedom doesn't just exist elsewhere. Sometimes it's protected in ways Americans never imagined. Not through louder slogans, but through quieter systems that simply work. This is where the conversation shifts from surprise to reflection. Because once the shock wears off, people start asking why daily life feels less tense in certain places, why neighbors seem more trusting, why public spaces feel calmer, why disagreement doesn't always turn into conflict, and suddenly freedom starts looking less like a declaration and more like an environment. One of the most uncomfortable discoveries is how much stress Americans have normalized: constant financial pressure, fear of getting sick, anxiety around work, safety, or falling behind. When Americans step into countries where these pressures are softened by social systems, they don't feel controlled, they feel relieved. And that relief feels suspicious at first, because no one ever told them freedom could feel quiet. There's also the myth that freedom requires struggle to be real, that if life isn't hard, it must be restricted. But many travelers realize that freedom can actually show up as stability. Predictable healthcare, reliable transportation, laws that protect personal time. And once you experience that, it's hard to unsee. What makes this realization powerful isn't comparison, it's contrast. Americans aren't suddenly rejecting their identity. They're expanding it. They begin to understand that loving your country doesn't mean pretending it's the only place where people live freely. And maybe that's the real shock. Not that freedom exists elsewhere, but that recognizing it doesn't weaken American freedom at all. It challenges it to grow. So if part 1 was about surprise, part 2 is about awareness. Because once you see how many forms freedom can take, you start asking a much better question. Not who has freedom, but what kind of freedom do we want to build? And that's a conversation worth having. If this made you think, or if you've had a culture shock moment of your own, drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear how travel or perspective changed the way you see freedom. And if you want more deep dives into cultural surprises and global reality checks, make sure to like, subscribe, and stick around. Because trust me, this isn't the last assumption the world is quietly challenging.